This video highlights the difference between criminal and civil cases. We've talked a little bit about the difference between like what are the different types of courts. There's also like different types of law that people dispute over too. So, in terms of like what kind of cases the courts hear, like what's the difference between a civil case and a criminal case? Well, in a criminal case, as the name implies, like some kind of crime was committed. The government is the one that's bringing forth the case against like the citizen. Right? Like you're being accused either by the federal government or a state government of like violating laws, like you committed a crime. So like the government is always part of that dispute. And then most likely, punishment in that type of case would be a loss of like your freedom, like you go to jail, right? If you're found guilty in a criminal case. A civil case is different. It could be that like your rights were violated, or there's some sort of like monetary dispute, and the suit is brought forth by like a private citizen. Right, one person is saying that they were essentially financially done wrong, and the punishment in this case, if you're found guilty in a civil case, is not like a loss of your freedom. You're not going to jail if found guilty in a civil case. Often you have to turn over money as like a result of like a decision, right, that goes against you. So a criminal case is more of like the government saying that you did this, and a civil case is like an individual saying that some organization, group, another person basically violated their rights or like hurt them financially, right? And again, found guilty, the person's not or group is not going to jail, right? They just generally lose money as a result of the decision. So, what are the major differences? The rules are not the same in a criminal case or a civil case. So defendants can plead the fifth in a criminal case, but they can't do that in a civil case. So like, what does that mean? When you plead the fifth, it means like you refuse to testify. If you're accused of something, you don't have to take the stand, right? The Fifth Amendment protects against self-incrimination. So like you can't be forced to testify in your trial in a criminal case. You can't plead the fifth in a civil case, right? So that's important to note. Lawyers must be provided in a criminal case. This is not necessarily the case in a civil case, right? So it's another major difference. There are typically 12 jurors in a criminal trial, and there are typically 8 jurors in a civil trial. In a criminal case, oftentimes the judge, after a case is over, the jury is deliberating, will tell them that they have to be like 95% like certain before they cast a guilty verdict. Beyond like a reasonable doubt is the phrase you usually hear. It's tough to throw the 95 number on there, but you have to be almost 100% certain that before you send somebody to jail that you are convinced the person did it. In a civil case, it's often you have to prove guilt beyond like a preponderance of the evidence, which is the threshold's last. It's like if you had to quantify it, it'd be like 51%. Like you just have to be kind of like reasonably like more certain than not. So definitely the standard of like proof for a guilty verdict is more in a criminal case than a civil case because you're not losing freedom in a civil case. And in order to be found guilty in a criminal trial, the verdict has to be unanimous, meaning like all jurors have to be on the same page, and all 12 jurors have to come back with guilty. You have to be like 100% in agreement. And if you can't come to an agreement, that's called a hung jury, and you essentially would have another trial. In order to be found guilty in a civil case, you just need a majority. You need 5 of the 8. So again, the rules are just different because you're not sort of like the person's freedom is not at stake. And a great example of this, it's kind of an old case by this point, is the famous O.J. Simpson murder case in 1995. I don't know how much you know about the case, and we can talk more about it in class. But O.J. Simpson was basically accused and charged with murdering his ex-wife and another sort of like acquaintance. And he was found not guilty in his criminal case for a bunch of different reasons, including, as you can see in the picture, if you don't know, O.J. Simpson was a famous like football player and movie star, and they found a murder at the murder scene. They found a glove that had been outside, and the prosecution asked him to try this glove on, thinking that it was his, in front of the jury, and the glove didn't fit. And this was one of like the landmark moments of the trial, and the jurors took this into consideration that maybe this wasn't his glove, meaning that he wasn't at the murder scene, and they found him not guilty in his criminal case. He found not guilty, so he can go to jail for murdering his ex-wife. However, he was then civilly charged by the family and he was found guilty in a civil case and ordered to pay $33 million to the victim's family. And how could you be found guilty in a criminal case, not guilty in a criminal case, but found guilty in a civil case? It's because, again, of all those differences we had just previously talked about. You plead the fifth in a criminal case, you can't do that in a civil case. The evidence is like proving guilt is different. So again, it found not guilty in his criminal case, he didn't go to jail, but found guilty in a civil case for wrongful death, and then ordered to pay like a pretty like hefty financial penalty as a result.